The winter wind howled through the trees of Horicon, Wisconsin, its cold fingers scratching against the windows of a small, unassuming house on Larrabee Street. From the outside, the Tallman family's home looked like any other in the quiet rural town. Modest, welcoming, its walls painted in a shade of cheery yellow that seemed almost defiant against the long, dark winters. But inside, something dark had taken root. Inside, something waited in the shadows. The Tallmans, Alan, his wife Debbie, and their 3 young children, had moved into the house with hope and optimism. It was the perfect place to build a life, they thought. The children would have room to play in the backyard, and the town was small, friendly, and safe. It was everything they had dreamed of, a fresh start. But almost immediately, small, strange things began to happen. At first, they were easy to dismiss. A toy car that moved on its own, small footsteps heard in the hallway when everyone was in bed. But soon, the small things grew darker, more sinister. It began with the bunk beds. The Tallmans had bought the second-hand bunk beds for their 2 youngest children, hoping to make their shared room more comfortable. But from the moment the beds arrived, the house seemed to change. The air grew colder, heavier, like a storm gathering just outside the door. The children complained of strange noises in the night. Whispers, like someone speaking just beyond their understanding, a faint rustling, like dry leaves in the wind. They woke up screaming, eyes wide with fear, crying out for their parents, shivering beneath their blankets. At first, Alan and Debbie tried to calm them with reassurances, dismissing their fears as mere nightmares. But the nightmares spread like a disease through the house, infecting them all. Alan began to wake up in the middle of the night, his skin cold and clammy, his heart racing in his chest. Debbie heard her name whispered in the darkness, a soft, raspy voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. One night, Alan came home late from work, exhausted, the cold air biting at his face. As he stepped into the garage, he felt it. A presence, something unseen, something watching him. He turned, expecting to see a shadow moving in the dim light, but there was nothing. And then a voice, low, deep, rumbling, filled the garage, echoing off the walls. "Get out," it growled. A sound that was not quite human, not quite animal, but something in between, something filled with malice. Alan's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He fled into the house, slamming the door behind him, locking it with trembling hands. But the feeling didn't leave him. It stayed with him, clinging to his skin like sweat. The nights grew longer, the darkness deeper. The children spoke of a tall figure that stood at the foot of their beds, watching them with eyes that burned like embers in a dying fire. They described a face hidden in shadow, a mouth that twisted into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. Debbie saw it too. A dark form lurking in the hallway, just out of the corner of her eye, slipping into the shadows before she could truly see it. She felt cold hands on her back in the middle of the night, a pressure on her chest as if something heavy, something unseen, was sitting on her, squeezing the breath from her lungs. And then there was the radio. It was an old clock radio, a relic of another time, perched on a shelf in the kitchen. One night it crackled to life on its own, static filling the room, a strange, hissing noise that sent shivers down Debbie's spine. She turned it off, thinking it was just a malfunction, a glitch. But it turned on again, and again, and again. Each time, the noise grew louder, more insistent, a grating sound that seemed to vibrate through her bones. One night, as Alan lay in bed, the clock radio blared to life again, its volume cranked to the maximum. He leaped out of bed, yanking the cord from the wall, but the noise continued, a shrill, high-pitched wail that filled the house. It was as if the very air was screaming. Alan smashed the radio against the wall, his heart racing, sweat pouring down his face. But even then, he swore he could still hear it, a faint, distant hum, like a whispering voice, just beyond hearing. Desperation set in. The family sought the help of their local pastor, hoping that perhaps prayer would drive away whatever dark force had taken hold of their home. The pastor came, blessed the house, prayed over every room, every corner, every shadow. For a time, the house seemed quiet, still, but it was a calm that felt wrong, unnatural, like the silence before a storm, when the air is charged with electricity, when you know something is coming, something terrible. And then, one night it came. Alan was jolted awake by a scream. A scream that pierced the night like a knife. A scream that sent ice running through his veins. He ran to the children's room, his heart pounding, his breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts. He found his daughter standing in her bed, her eyes wide with terror, pointing at something in the corner. "There!" she cried, her voice trembling. "There, it's here!" Alan turned, his eyes following her finger, and he saw it. A figure, tall and dark, a shadow that seemed to suck the light from the room. It stood there, still, silent, its face hidden in the darkness, its eyes gleaming like two tiny coals. And then it moved. Slowly, impossibly, it began to advance, its steps soundless, its shape shifting as it came closer, closer. Alan grabbed his daughter, pulling her into his arms, running from the room, his heart racing, his mind reeling. He heard a laugh, a deep, rumbling laugh that filled the house, that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. He felt something brush against him, something cold, something sharp, like fingers trailing down his back. They fled that night. The family packed their bags, leaving everything behind, driving through the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife. They didn't stop until they were miles away, until the house was nothing but a distant memory, a silhouette against the rising dawn. But even then, they could not shake the feeling that they were not alone, that something had followed them, something that still clung to them, hidden in the shadows. The house on Larrabee Street stood empty for years, its windows dark, its doors locked. Neighbors spoke of hearing strange noises at night, whispers, footsteps, the faint sound of a child's laughter. The bunk beds were destroyed, burned in a fire that sent thick, black smoke curling into the sky. But some say the beds were not the source of the darkness, only a vessel, a means for whatever evil lurked in that house to make itself known. And though the Tallman family has moved on, the memory of those nights still lingers, a shadow that will not fade, a nightmare that refuses to end. And sometimes on cold, windy nights, when the moon is hidden behind clouds and the streets of Horicon are dark and empty, you can hear it. A faint, distant whisper, carried on the wind, the sound of a door creaking open, the sound of something waiting.